The crystal whiskey tumbler felt cool against my palm as I watched my husband Daniel toast to new beginnings with Sophia, my best friend of 12 years and now his lover, wearing the emerald bracelet he'd given me for our anniversary, their triumphant smiles reflecting in the eyes of dinner guests who pitied me as the discarded wife. Not one person in this room suspected that as Chief Investment Officer of Meridian Financial, I'd spent the last month meticulously documenting their embezzlement scheme, and that by this time tomorrow, the empire they built by betraying me would spectacularly implode while I watched with the same composed smile I wore now, savoring each moment like the expensive whiskey that burned a path down my throat. Smooth, intense, and ultimately devastating. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Rebecca, Daniel called out, his voice dripping with false warmth. Thank you for joining us tonight. It means so much that we can all be adults about this situation. Adults, as if I had any choice but to attend this dinner celebrating their new condo purchase. As Chief Investment Officer of Meridian Financial, I needed to maintain appearances, even if only 4 people in the world knew I held that position. Of course, I replied softly, playing my role perfectly. We're all moving forward with our lives. Sophia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the only person at the table who seemed genuinely unsettled by my presence. Perhaps she had enough of a conscience to feel guilty about betraying our friendship. Or perhaps she simply didn't want the ex-wife at her housewarming dinner. If she only knew she was sitting in a chair I had personally selected, in a condo I had approved the purchase of through a shell company Meridian Financial owned. Rebecca's been incredibly understanding, Daniel continued, addressing the table at large. Really, it's been the most amicable separation I could have imagined. She didn't even fight me on the financial settlement. A few guests nodded approvingly while others stared at their plates. They probably thought I was a fool for not demanding more in the divorce. After all, Daniel's position as head of client relations at Meridian Financial made him quite comfortable financially. But I hadn't wanted his money. I had my own. Far. More than he could imagine. Will you be keeping the house in Oakwood Heights? Martin, one of Daniel's colleagues, asked me, probably trying to be kind. I smiled demurely. No, I've downsized to a small apartment in Westlake. Nothing fancy, but it suits my needs now. Have you thought about dating again? Martin's wife inquired. I know a wonderful life coach who specializes in helping women rebuild after divorce. Rebecca's not really the dating type, Daniel interrupted with a patronizing smile. She's more focused on her community college classes and volunteer work at the animal shelter. Very admirable. More nods of approval. Sweet Rebecca. Simple Rebecca. Dedicating herself to education and charity work while her ex-husband moved into a luxury condo with her former best friend. If they could see my actual office on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Financial building where I spent my days orchestrating billion-dollar investments. My phone vibrated silently in my lap. A message from Naomi, my chief of security. Audit completed. Evidence secured. Board meeting confirmed for 8:30 a.m. I excused myself to use the powder room, my heels clicking against the Italian marble floors Sophia had bragged about when giving the house tour. In the privacy of the bathroom, I reviewed the preliminary audit report Naomi had sent. Everything was in order for tomorrow's announcement. Meridian Financial would be launching an extensive internal investigation into client fund mismanagement, specifically targeting the activities in Daniel's department. As I returned to the dining room, I heard Daniel regaling the table with the story of how he and Sophia reconnected at a finance conference in Chicago. It was like seeing her with new eyes, he said, squeezing her hand affectionately. Sometimes you just know when something is meant to be. I remembered another story he used to tell about meeting a shy economics student at a university career fair, about how her quiet brilliance and unassuming manner had captured his attention. But that was before he'd gotten a taste of corporate status, before his ambition had eroded his integrity. Little did he know that every promotion, every opportunity, every success he'd achieved at Meridian Financial had been carefully monitored by me. I'd been testing him, watching to see if power would corrupt him. It had. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of the end, not just for Daniel, but for the carefully constructed facade that Sophia had helped him build. Because while she thought she was dating a rising star at Meridian Financial, the truth was far more complicated. The dinner continued with the clink of silverware against fine china, with practiced smiles and rehearsed stories. With each passing moment, with each toast to the happy couple, I felt the weight of tomorrow's revelation growing heavier, sweeter. After all, revenge, like the finest whiskey, is best savored slowly. Daniel leaned forward to refill Sophia's glass, his hand lingering on hers. "We're thinking about St. Bart's for a getaway next month," he announced to the table. "A little pre-honeymoon, you might say." Sophia blushed, the emerald bracelet, my bracelet, catching the light as she touched his arm affectionately. "Daniel, we haven't even officially announced our engagement yet." "Well, maybe tonight's the night," he replied with a wink that made several guests chuckle appreciatively. I took another small sip of my whiskey, my face betraying nothing. They had no idea that in less than 12 hours, there would be no Saint Bart's vacation, no engagement announcement, no future at Meridian Financial. The audit had confirmed what I'd suspected for months. Daniel had been using client accounts to fund his lavish lifestyle. Small amounts at first, skillfully concealed within legitimate transactions. But as his relationship with Sophia had progressed, so had his boldness. Designer clothes, luxury vacations, the down payment on their condo, all purchased with embezzled client funds. And Sophia, my trusted friend of over a decade, had leveraged her position at Martinez Accounting to help hide the transactions. The same friend who had held my hand through my father's funeral. The same friend who had been the maid of honor at my wedding. The same friend who had systematically worked to undermine my marriage while I was caring for my dying mother. "Rebecca, you've barely touched your sea bass," Daniel's boss, Jeffrey, remarked from across the table. "Chef Marcel is the best in the city. Sophia and Daniel were lucky to book him for tonight." I smiled politely. "It's delicious. I'm just savoring it slowly, like the justice that was coming." My phone vibrated again. Another message from Naomi. "Media alert prepared. SEC notification drafts complete." Good. By this time tomorrow, Daniel. And Sophia's faces would be splashed across the financial news sections, not as the power couple they imagined themselves to be, but as the subjects of one of the most significant financial fraud investigations in our firm's history. "More wine, Rebecca?" Sophia asked, holding up an expensive bottle of Cabernet. Her hand trembled slightly. Despite her confident exterior, she had always been a terrible liar. Some part of her must have known this perfect life she'd stolen was built on quicksand. "No, thank you," I replied. "I should be going soon. Early morning. Tomorrow." "Community college classes?" Daniel asked with that slightly condescending tone he'd developed over the past year. "Something like that," I answered, meeting his gaze steadily. For a moment, just a heartbeat, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Had he caught something in my tone? Some hint of the storm that was coming? But then Sophia leaned in to whisper something in his ear, and the moment passed. His attention, as always lately, is easily diverted by superficial charm. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. As the dinner wound down and guests began to make their excuses, I gathered my things and prepared to leave. Daniel, ever the image-conscious host, walked me to the door. "Thanks for coming, Becca," he said quietly, using the nickname I'd once loved. I know this can't be easy, but it means a lot that you're being so reasonable about everything. I looked up at him. This man I had once built dreams with. This man who had thrown away 15 years of marriage for the illusion of something more exciting. Life is full of surprises, Daniel, I said simply. We never really know what tomorrow might bring. With that cryptic farewell, I stepped out into the cool spring evening, my heart beating steadily with the calm certainty of what was to come. Behind me, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded as I walked to my car. Not the modest Honda I'd arrived in for appearances, but the BMW I'd parked a block away. The night was just beginning, and I had preparations to make. The board meeting was scheduled for 8:30 a.m., but I planned to arrive at Meridian Financial by 6 mark, using my private access card to enter through the executive garage. Tomorrow, Daniel and Sophia would learn what it truly meant to lose everything. The morning of the board meeting dawned crisp and clear. I arrived at Meridian Financial at 5:45 a.m., using my private elevator to reach the executive floor. The early hour ensured I wouldn't run into Daniel or Sophia, who occasionally liked to show up at 8:30 to network with the senior management team over coffee and pastries. Naomi waited in my office, sharp-eyed and efficient in her tailored suit. One of the few people who knew my true identity, she'd been my father's head of security before becoming mine, helping maintain the illusion that I was just a mid-level compliance officer rather than the person who actually controlled 51% of Meridian Financial's shares. The audit report is ready, she said, sliding a folder across my desk. Daniel's been siphoning client funds for 18 months. Started small, weekend getaways, restaurant bills, but escalated significantly after he began seeing Sophia. The condo down payment was the largest single amount. I opened the folder, examining the meticulously documented trail of fraud. And the connection to Martinez accounting? Irrefutable. Naomi pulled up a series of emails on my secure terminal. Sophia created shell accounts to hide the transfers. These communications show she was fully aware of what she was doing. I studied the email exchanges between my husband and my best friend, dated months before I'd discovered their affair, back when Daniel was still coming home to me at night, when Sophia was still texting me daily about lunch plans and weekend getaways. The betrayal had started long before I'd caught them together. Is everything prepared for the 9:30 announcement? I asked, closing the folder. Yes. The SEC representatives will arrive at 9 bars. The board has been notified of an emergency meeting regarding compliance violations, but they don't know the specifics yet. Naomi's expression remained professional, but I caught the glimmer of anticipation in her eyes. She'd witnessed my pain when I discovered the affair. She knew this was both business and personal. And the press release? Ready to go out at 11 a.m. after the formal charges are filed. I opened my laptop, reviewing the morning's schedule. What about Daniel's team? They've been summoned for a 10-yard meeting. We've arranged for security to be present when the announcement is made. His department's files are already secured. No one can delete anything. I thought about Daniel's loyal team, wondering how many of them suspected what their boss had been doing. Probably none. Daniel had always been skilled at maintaining his public image, at making people see only what he wanted them to see. Have Sophia's credentials been revoked? I asked. As of midnight. She won't be able to access any Meridian systems when she tries to log in this morning. I nodded, satisfied with the preparations. And her firm? Martinez Accounting has been notified of potential compliance issues affecting their relationship with Meridian. They don't know it involves Sophia yet. I stood, walking to the window wall that overlooked the city. Somewhere down there, Daniel was probably just waking up, perhaps rolling over to kiss Sophia, both of them planning another day of living their stolen life at my expense. My phone buzzed, a message from our head of building security. Mr. Reynolds and Ms. Martinez approaching. The parking garage. They're early today, I remarked, checking my watch. It was barely 7:15. Naomi checked her tablet. They have an 8-salad breakfast meeting with Eastwood Investments. Daniel's been pursuing them as clients for months. I smiled thinly. A meeting that won't be happening. I spent the next hour reviewing the details of our case against Daniel and Sophia one final time. The evidence was overwhelming. Falsified transaction records, unauthorized account access, forged client authorizations. Daniel had grown increasingly sloppy as his relationship with Sophia intensified, as if their affair had made him feel invincible. At 8:30, the elevator chimed, announcing the arrival of Meridian's board members. Through the security feed, I watched them file into the conference room, expressions serious but curious. None of them knew why they'd been summoned with such urgency. "It's time," Naomi said, gathering the presentation materials. I nodded, straightening my tailored jacket. Not the modest outfit I wore for my compliance officer role, but the custom-made suit that reflected my true position. Today, there would be no more hiding behind carefully constructed personas. At precisely 8:45, I stepped into the boardroom. The low murmur of conversation died instantly as 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me, expressions shifting from confusion to recognition to shock. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady and authoritative. For those who don't know me in this capacity, I'm Rebecca Reynolds, majority shareholder and chief investment officer of Meridian Financial. The room erupted in whispers. Harold Winters, our public-facing CEO and one of the few who knew my true role, nodded encouragingly from his seat. "Today, we're addressing a serious breach of fiduciary duty and criminal activity within our organization," I continued, nodding to Naomi, who distributed folders to each board member. "These documents detail an extensive fraud scheme orchestrated by our head of client relations, Daniel Reynolds, with assistance from Sophia Martinez of Martinez Accounting." The board members hurriedly opened their folders, eyes widening as they scanned the evidence. "But that's your husband," objected Richard Torres, one of our newer board members. "And isn't Sophia Martinez your—" "My soon-to-be ex-husband and former friend, yes," I interrupted smoothly. "Their personal betrayal does not exempt them from professional consequences." I moved to the head of the table, clicking through a presentation that detailed each aspect of Daniel and Sophia's scheme. With each slide, the board members' expressions hardened. By the time I finished, there was no doubt about the path forward. "SEC representatives will be arriving momentarily," I informed them. "Criminal charges are being filed against both individuals. Meridian Financial will, of course, cooperate fully with the investigation and make restitution to any affected clients." "How did we miss this?" demanded Eliza Chen, our risk management director. "Daniel was careful initially, and he had inside help," I explained. "But we caught it, and now we're taking decisive action. That's what matters." Harold cleared his throat. "I assume you have a containment strategy for the public relations aspect of this?" "Our PR team has prepared a statement emphasizing our zero-tolerance policy and the steps we're taking to strengthen oversight. The market will respond more positively to transparency and decisive action than to any attempt at concealment." A notification appeared on my tablet. Daniel had just badged into the executive floor. "Perfect timing. Mr. Reynolds is in the building," I announced to the board. "With your approval, we'll proceed with the confrontation phase of our plan, the CAR." Vote was unanimous. No one on Meridian's board was willing to protect a man who had stolen from clients and damaged the firm's reputation, regardless of his personal connection to me. "Bring him in," I instructed Naomi. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I watched as 2 security officers approached Daniel at his office door. His confident smile faltered as they spoke to him, then disappeared entirely as they escorted him toward the boardroom. The door opened, and Daniel stepped in, confusion evident on his face. His eyes swept the room, landing finally on me standing at the head of the table, a position he had never seen me occupy. "Rebecca," he said, his voice uncertain. "What's going on? Why are you—" Please take a seat, Mr. Reynolds, I interrupted, gesturing to the lone chair positioned directly across from me. The board has some questions about your management of client accounts. Daniel's face paled as he noticed the folders in front of each board member. I don't understand. I'm supposed to be meeting with Eastwood Investments right now. That meeting has been canceled, I informed him calmly, as have all your other appointments, indefinitely. The color drained further from his face as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Whatever this is, there must be some mistake. I've managed my client relationships with absolute integrity. Is that what you call embezzling $2.7 million over 18 months? Harold interjected, his voice sharp with disgust. Is that what you call colluding with outside accounting firms to conceal unauthorized transactions? Daniel's eyes darted frantically between the board members before settling back on me, realization finally dawning. You're not just in compliance. No, Daniel, I'm not. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. I never was. His confusion gave way to anger. This is about us, isn't it? About Sophia? You're abusing your position to... This is about fraud, Mr. Reynolds. I cut him off coldly. Your personal choices simply made it easier to discover your professional ones. Daniel's face contorted with a mixture of shock and rage as he struggled to process what was happening. This is insane, he sputtered, looking around the boardroom for an ally. Finding none, he turned back to me. I've done nothing wrong. This is a personal vendetta. Personal vendetta? Harold repeated incredulously. Mr. Reynolds, we're looking at documented evidence of systematic fraud totaling millions of dollars. Your personal history with Ms. Reynolds is irrelevant to these findings. Daniel's shoulders slumped slightly as the severity of his situation began to sink in. Before he could respond further, the boardroom door opened again, and two men in dark suits entered. SEC agents Wilson and Patel, Naomi announced, ushering them in. Daniel's head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes. The SEC? Rebecca, you can't be serious. As I mentioned, I continued calmly, addressing the board rather than Daniel. Meridian Financial intends to cooperate fully with regulatory authorities in this matter. Agent Wilson stepped forward. Mr. Reynolds, we'd like to ask you some questions about certain transactions flagged in your department's accounts. I want my lawyer, Daniel said immediately, his voice strained. That's certainly your right, Agent Wilson replied. But right now, we're just having a conversation. My tablet vibrated with an incoming message. Ms. Martinez has arrived in the building, the security chief reported. Perfect timing. If you'll excuse me for a moment, I said, rising from my seat. The board can continue without me briefly. Agents, I believe you'll find the documentation we've provided quite comprehensive. I stepped out of the boardroom, instructing security to escort Sophia to my private office rather than the boardroom. This confrontation needed to be handled differently. When I entered my office, Sophia was pacing nervously, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors. She whirled around as the door closed behind me, relief washing over her face. Rebecca! Thank God it's you. Something weird is happening. My access badge isn't working properly, and security just escorted me here instead of the executive lounge. And my login credentials are... She stopped abruptly, finally registering my expression, the formal setting of the office she'd never seen before. What's going on? I moved to my desk, not offering her a seat. Interesting that your first concern is about access credentials, Sophia, not about the fact that your boyfriend is currently being questioned by SEC agents in the boardroom. Her face paled. SEC? What are you talking about? I pulled up the surveillance feed from the boardroom on my monitor, turning it so she could see Daniel sitting rigidly in his chair as the agents methodically worked through their questions. He's being investigated for fraud, as are you. Me? Her voice rose an octave. That's ridiculous. I don't even work here. No, I agreed. You work at Martinez Accounting, where you've been falsifying records to help Daniel embezzle client funds. The same funds that paid for your condo, your vacations, and that lovely Cartier watch you're wearing. Sophia's hand instinctively moved to cover the watch. I don't know what you're talking about. Daniel said that watch was a bonus he gave himself by stealing from client accounts. I finished for her. And you helped hide the paper trail. That's not... I didn't... She stopped, her breath coming in quick gasps. Rebecca, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. I would never... Save it. I turned my tablet toward her, displaying an email chain between her and Daniel dated 13 months ago, 3 months before I discovered their affair. You discussed specific methods for concealing unauthorized transfers. You suggested creating shell accounts under marginally different client names. You even joked about how easy it was to fool the compliance team. That would be the department where you thought I worked. She sank into a chair uninvited, her composure cracking. It wasn't like that. Daniel said these were approved bonuses. That we were just expediting the paperwork. Stop lying. My voice was ice. It's over, Sophia. Meridian Financial has filed formal charges against both of you. Martinez Accounting has been notified. Your father is currently meeting with their board to discuss the implications for the firm. At the mention of her father, founder and CEO of Martinez Accounting, Sophia's face crumpled. She'd always been desperate for his approval and had worked her way up through the firm to prove herself worthy of eventually taking over. My dad doesn't know yet, she whispered. He's finding out right now, I confirmed, concurrent with this meeting. Sophia buried her face in her hands. This will destroy him. The firm has a perfect reputation. You should have thought about that before you decided to help my husband steal money and destroy our marriage, I replied, unmoved by her tears. Actions have consequences, Sophia. She looked up, mascara streaking her cheeks. This is revenge, isn't it? For me and Daniel? I leaned forward across my desk. Let me be perfectly clear. This isn't happening because you slept with my husband. This is happening because you committed financial fraud. The fact that you betrayed our 12-year friendship in the process just means I don't feel the slightest guilt about turning you in. My phone buzzed, Naomi letting me know that Daniel was being formally detained for questioning at SEC headquarters. It's time for you to leave, I informed Sophia. Security will escort you to meet with the SEC agents. I suggest you cooperate fully. It might help mitigate your sentence. Sentence? She repeated, the word landing like a physical blow. Rebecca, please, we can work something out. We already did work something out, I replied coldly. Remember? When you were my maid of honor? When you promised to always be there for me? When you spent girls' nights listening to me worry about my marriage while you were already sleeping with my husband? Her face flushed with shame. I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. No, I cut her off. Affairs don't just happen. Fraud doesn't just happen. These were choices, Sophia. Deliberate choices you made day after day, betrayal after betrayal. Security knocked at the door, right on schedule. Ms. Martinez, we need you to come with us, please. Sophia stood shakily, her perfect image now completely undone. What's going to happen now? Now? I returned to my desk, already focusing on my tablet, dismissing her. Now you face the consequences of your actions, both professionally and personally. As security led her away, I allowed myself a moment of grim satisfaction. Phase 1 of the confrontation had gone exactly as planned, but the day was far from over. I returned to the boardroom to find that Daniel had already been escorted out of the building by the SEC agents. The board members looked shell-shocked, several still poring over the evidence files. Well, Haroldy said as I took my seat at the head of the table. That was illuminating. What happens next? Asked Eliza, our risk management director. We issue a press release at 11:00 as planned, I replied. pulling up the draft on the main screen. We emphasize our zero-tolerance policy for fraud, our cooperation with authorities, and our commitment to making any affected clients whole. And the market response? Richard Torres looked concerned. This could trigger a significant confidence issue. It won't, I assured him. We're getting ahead of the story, we've already removed the problem, and we're demonstrating strong governance. The temporary dip will recover within days. I pulled up a slide with projections to support my assertion. I'd been planning this moment for months. Every contingency had been considered. As the board meeting concluded, I returned to my office to find Naomi waiting with updates. Daniel's been formally arrested, she reported. Sophia is still being questioned, but charges are imminent. Martinez Accounting has issued a statement distancing themselves from her actions and pledging full cooperation with investigators. And the press? I asked, checking the time. It was nearly 11 BAC. The story's already leaking. Financial reporters are calling for comments. Our PR team is managing it exactly as planned. I nodded, satisfied. What about the condo? Their bank has been notified of the fraud investigation. The mortgage will be frozen pending resolution. They won't be making any more payments or living there much longer. I walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. In just a few hours, everything had changed for Daniel and Sophia. Their careers were over. Their reputations were destroyed. Their relationship would likely crumble under the pressure of mutual recrimination and legal troubles. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, Daniel's mother, Catherine. I hesitated only briefly before answering. Rebecca. Her voice was strained, desperate. What's happening? Daniel just called me from police custody. Something about fraud charges? He said you're behind this? I'm behind discovering the fraud, yes, I replied evenly. Daniel is behind committing it. This isn't like him, she protested. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Catherine. We have documented evidence spanning 18 months. He's been stealing from client accounts and using the money to fund his lifestyle with Sophia. A long silence followed. Catherine had always adored Daniel, her only son. Had always made excuses for his less admirable behaviors, but even she couldn't dismiss federal fraud charges. How bad is it? She finally asked, her voice smaller. Bad, I answered honestly. He's looking at significant jail time. The evidence is overwhelming. Another lengthy pause. And there's nothing you can do? For old time's sake? I thought of all the holidays at Catherine's house, the way she'd welcomed me into the family, treated me like the daughter she never had. Then I thought of how quickly she'd embraced Sophia once Daniel had announced our separation, how she'd handed down family jewelry to my replacement without a second thought. What I've done, I said finally, is ensure that justice is served. That's all I can do, Catherine. That's all I should do. After ending the call, I turned back to Naomi. Is everything ready for the press conference? She nodded. Scheduled for 2 p.m., Harold will handle most of it as the public face of the company, but they'd like you to make a brief statement as well. I considered this. For years, I'd remained in the shadows, letting others serve as the public face of Meridian Financial, while I quietly controlled everything from behind the scenes. Today had already changed that dynamic within the company. Perhaps it was time to emerge completely. Tell the PR team I'll be available, I decided. It's time people know exactly who's running this company. Naomi smiled slightly, the closest she ever came to showing emotion at work. About time. My phone buzzed again, a news alert. The story had broken. I clicked on the link to find Daniel's corporate headshot alongside a breaking news banner. Meridian Financial executive arrested in major fraud scheme. The press conference room at Meridian Financial was filled to capacity by 1:45 p.m. News of Daniel's arrest had spread like wildfire through financial circles, and reporters from every major outlet had scrambled to secure a spot. As I watched the feed from a private room adjacent to the conference area, I noted the hungry expressions on the journalists' faces. Financial fraud involving high-level executives always made for sensational headlines. Harold was reviewing his notes one final time, the consummate professional even in crisis. We'd worked together for nearly a decade, ever since my father had passed the reins of Meridian to me. Harold had been one of the few people my father had trusted with the knowledge of our family's controlling interest in the firm, and he'd served as the perfect public-facing CEO while I directed strategy from behind the scenes. "Ready?" he asked as I joined him. "As I'll ever be," I replied, smoothing down my jacket. "You don't have to do this part, you know," he reminded me gently. "We can handle the press without revealing your true position." I shook my head. "It's time, Harold. I'm tired of hiding." At precisely 2 p.m., we entered the conference room to a barrage of camera flashes. Harold stepped to the podium first, his commanding presence immediately quieting the room. "Good afternoon," he began. "As you're aware, Meridian Financial has uncovered significant evidence of fraud committed by one of our executives, Daniel Reynolds, head of client relations, with assistance from an external accountant, Sophia Martinez of Martinez Accounting. Both individuals have been arrested and charged. Meridian is cooperating fully with authorities and has already begun the process of making restitution to affected clients." The reporters scribbled frantically, digital recorders held high. "I want to emphasize that Meridian Financial has a zero-tolerance policy for ethical violations of any kind," Harold continued. "The actions of Mr. Reynolds and Ms. Martinez are entirely contrary to our company values and the trust our clients place in us. We have already implemented additional oversight measures to ensure such a breach cannot occur again." A forest of hands shot up as reporters clamored to ask questions. Harold fielded the first several with practiced ease, providing just enough detail to satisfy without revealing anything that might compromise the ongoing investigation. Then came the question I'd been anticipating. "Mr. Winters, isn't it true that Daniel Reynolds is married to a Meridian employee? How did this personal connection factor into the company's handling of the situation?" Harold glanced at me, receiving my slight nod. "That brings me to an important announcement," he said, stepping slightly aside. "I'd like to introduce someone who has played a crucial role in uncovering this fraud and who will be taking a more public leadership position at Meridian moving forward." I approached the podium, feeling the weight of dozens of curious stares. Few in the room recognized me. I'd intentionally kept a low profile throughout my career. "Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Reynolds, Chief Investment Officer and majority shareholder of Meridian Financial." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. I waited for them to subside before continuing. To address the question directly, yes, Daniel Reynolds is my soon-to-be ex-husband. However, this personal connection did not impede our investigation. Rather, it enabled us to identify suspicious activities sooner than might otherwise have been possible. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal jumped in. "Ms. Reynolds, are you saying you personally led the investigation against your husband?" "Initiated the audit process upon noticing discrepancies," I clarified. "The investigation itself was conducted by our compliance team in conjunction with external auditors to ensure complete objectivity." "And what about Sophia Martinez?" called out another reporter. "Isn't she a close personal friend of yours?" I met the question with calm directness. Ms. Martinez was indeed a longtime friend. She was also the accountant who helped conceal the fraudulent transactions. In matters of financial ethics, personal relationships cannot and do not take precedence over our responsibility to our clients and shareholders. The questions continued rapid fire for another 20 minutes. I answered each one with the same measured composure, neither hiding from the personal aspects of the story nor allowing them to overshadow the professional violations that were the real issue. As the press conference concluded, Harold announced that I would be assuming the role of public CEO effective immediately, with him transitioning to chairman of the board. The reporters erupted with fresh questions, but our PR director stepped in, indicating that our time was up. Back in my office, I watched as the first news reports began to air. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, industry associates, and friends who were just discovering my true role at Meridian. Each notification felt like another brick falling from the wall I'd hidden behind for so many years. "You handled that perfectly," Naomi commented, bringing in the latest updates. "The market's actually responding positively. Our stock dipped initially but has already recovered most of the loss. Analysts are praising our transparency and swift action." I nodded, not surprised. "And Daniel? Sophia?" "Both are still in custody. Daniel's lawyer is trying to arrange bail, but with the flight risk and the amount involved, it's unlikely to be granted." She hesitated. "There's something else. Sophia's father had a heart attack after the news broke." I looked up sharply. "Is he all right?" "Stable, but in intensive care. Martinez Accounting has issued a statement that he's temporarily stepping down as CEO while he recovers." Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. Anthony Martinez had always been kind to me, had welcomed me into their family gatherings long before Sophia had betrayed our friendship. He didn't deserve this collateral damage from his daughter's actions. "Send flowers anonymously," I instructed, "and make sure our legal team knows to focus their allegations specifically on Sophia, not the firm as a whole. Anthony shouldn't lose his company over this." Naomi nodded, making a note. "Compassionate, considering." "It's not compassion," I clarified. "It's justice. Anthony isn't responsible for what Sophia did." My private line rang. Catherine Reynolds again. I braced myself before answering. "I just saw you on television," she said without preamble, her voice rigid with anger. "All this time, you've been lying about who you really are?" "I kept my professional position private," I corrected. "That's not the same as lying." "Daniel never knew, did he? About your real role at Meridian?" "No. I kept my work life separate for many reasons." She made a scoffing sound. "Including setting him up for a fall?" "Catherine," I said firmly, "your son set himself up. He chose to steal from clients. He chose to betray his marriage vows. He chose to involve Sophia in criminal activity. All I did was uncover what he'd already done." "You could have handled this privately," she insisted. "Instead, you've humiliated him publicly, destroyed his career." "He destroyed his own career when he decided to commit fraud," I interrupted. "And no, we couldn't handle millions in client theft privately." "That's not how financial regulations work." A long silence followed. When Catherine spoke again, her voice was lower, defeated. "He's facing up to 30 years, his lawyer says." 30 years, Rebecca. I closed my eyes briefly, allowing myself to feel a momentary twinge of what might have been grief for the future we'd once planned together. Then I remembered finding them together in my bed, our bed, when I'd come home early from caring for my dying mother. I remembered Sophia's lack of remorse, Daniel's cold insistence that I'd let myself go, and that he deserved better. Actions have consequences, Catherine, I said finally. "I'm sorry that this hurts you, but I'm not responsible for the choices Daniel made." After ending the call, I turned back to the mounting stack of messages and emails requiring my attention. The day's events had fundamentally altered Meridian's public identity, and there was much work to be done to stabilize our client relationships and market position. Hours later, as the office emptied for the night, I remained at my desk, reviewing the preliminary damage reports. Most clients had reacted positively to our swift handling of the fraud, but several major accounts needed personal reassurance. A soft knock at my door interrupted my concentration. It was Harold, looking tired, but satisfied. "Quite a day," he remarked, taking a seat opposite my desk. "How are you holding up?" I considered the question seriously. "Surprisingly well." He studied me with the same thoughtful expression he'd worn when my father first introduced us years ago. "You know, when your father told me his quiet, bookish daughter would be taking over Meridian one day, I had my doubts. not anymore. I smiled slightly. High praise. Well deserved. He leaned forward. But I have to ask, why now? You could have continued operating behind the scenes even after exposing Daniel's fraud. Why step into the spotlight? I was silent for a moment, organizing my thoughts. For years, I believed staying in the background gave me an advantage. People underestimated me, which was useful. Daniel certainly did. I looked out at the city lights beginning to sparkle in the dusk. But I'm tired of being underestimated, Harold. Tired of being invisible. What happened with Daniel and Sophia? It made me realize that hiding my power doesn't protect me. It just makes it easier for others to dismiss me. Harold nodded thoughtfully. Well, no one will be dismissing you after today. As he left, I returned to the window, watching the city transform as darkness fell. Somewhere out there, Daniel and Sophia were in custody, their perfect future together crumbling around them. Their shared condo would soon be seized as evidence. Their reputations in the financial world were irreparably damaged. The life they'd built on betrayal and theft was over. My phone buzzed one final time for the evening. A text from Naomi. Thought you should know. Daniel's trying to make a deal, offering information in exchange for leniency. I wasn't surprised. Daniel had always prioritized self-preservation above all else. No doubt he was already trying to shift as much blame as possible onto Sophia. Let the prosecutors handle it, I texted back. Our part is done. And it was. I had exposed their crimes, protected my company, and reclaimed my power. The legal system would determine their punishment. My focus now needed to be on rebuilding Meridian's reputation and leading it into the future. Openly, without hiding in the shadows. The revenge I'd planned had been executed perfectly. But strangely, as I gathered my things to leave for the night, I realized that revenge itself wasn't the victory. The real triumph was in finally stepping fully into my power, in refusing to be the quiet, accommodating woman that Daniel and others had always expected me to be. That was a victory that would last long after Daniel and Sophia's betrayal had faded into a distant memory. The morning after the press conference dawned with my face splashed across the front page of every financial publication in the country. Shadow CEO exposes fraud and takes control, read the Wall Street Journal headline. The Financial Times went with Meridian's secret power player emerges amid scandal. Even the more sensationalist outlets couldn't resist the personal angle. Betrayed wife brings down cheating exec-husband. I scrolled through the coverage on my tablet as my driver navigated through morning traffic. Most of the reporting was surprisingly accurate, focusing on my credentials and leadership, rather than just the salacious details of Daniel and Sophia's betrayal. Still, every article mentioned our personal connection. It was impossible to separate the professional fraud from the personal deception that had accompanied it. Ms. Reynolds, my driver interrupted my thoughts. There are reporters outside the office building. I glanced up to see a small crowd gathered near Meridian's main entrance, cameras and microphones at the ready. After years of anonymity, sudden visibility felt jarring. Take me to the executive garage, I instructed. I wasn't avoiding the press. I'd have to face them eventually. But today I had more important matters to handle than impromptu interviews. As I entered my office, Naomi was waiting for the morning briefing. The board is completely behind you, she reported. They've issued a unanimous statement of support. The SEC has formally commended Meridian for our proactive handling of the situation. And 3 major clients who were considering leaving have decided to stay after your press conference performance. Good, I nodded, setting down my things. What about Daniel and Sophia? Both appeared before the judge this morning. Daniel's bail was set at $5 million, which he can't afford now that his assets are frozen. Sophia's was set at $3 million. Neither has been released. I raised an eyebrow. No one's posted bail for them? Sophia's family could afford it, but they're apparently letting her sit in jail for now. As for Daniel, she shrugged. His lawyer approached his friends, but no one stepping up. I wasn't surprised. Daniel had always treated friendships as transactions, cultivating relationships with people who could benefit his career. Now that he had nothing to offer, those fair-weather friends had disappeared. What about Catherine? I asked, thinking of his mother. She's mortgaged her house to pay the lawyer's retainer, but she doesn't have bail money. I felt a twinge of sympathy for Catherine. Despite her blind spot where her son was concerned, she didn't deserve to lose her home over this. Have our legal team monitor the situation, I said. I don't want to interfere directly, but make sure Catherine knows her house is not at risk. It was a small kindness, but one I could afford. My quarrel had never been with her. Naomi nodded, making a note. Also, Martinez Accounting has issued a formal statement distancing themselves from Sophia. They've conducted an internal audit and are cooperating fully with authorities. Anthony Martinez remains in the hospital, but his condition has stabilized. And their clients? Fleeing in droves. Their reputation has taken a massive hit. Several major clients have already approached us about transferring their accounts to Meridian. I considered this. Accept transfers only from clients who had no connection to the fraud. I don't want any appearance that we're capitalizing on this situation for business gain. Naomi smiled slightly. Very diplomatic. It's not diplomacy, I corrected. It's integrity. We just held a press conference emphasizing our ethical standards. We need to live up to them. My calendar for the day was packed with back-to-back meetings, reassuring major clients, strategizing with the PR team, and preparing for an emergency all-hands company meeting scheduled for that afternoon. Each interaction required me to be present, focused, and in command, the very opposite of the quiet background role I'd played for so many years. Between meetings, I received a message that made me pause. Daniel's lawyer has requested a private meeting, says his client has information that would be mutually beneficial to discuss. I showed the message to Harold, who frowned. Sounds like a desperate plea bargain attempt. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I agree, I said. Tell the lawyer that any information Daniel has should be shared with the prosecutors. Meridian has nothing to negotiate. By midday, the steady stream of developments continued. Martinez Accounting announced a complete restructuring, with Anthony Martinez stepping down permanently and the firm being acquired by a larger competitor. Sophia's professional reputation was in tatters. The accounting licensing board had already initiated proceedings to revoke her credentials. As for Daniel, his desperation was becoming increasingly evident. His lawyer had leaked to the press that he was cooperating fully and had valuable information about broader issues at Meridian Financial. It was a transparent attempt to shift blame and create doubt about the company's integrity. Should we respond? Asked our PR director during our afternoon strategy session. I shook my head. That's exactly what he wants. We've been transparent from the beginning. The evidence against Daniel and Sophia is overwhelming. Let his baseless claims die from lack of oxygen. The all-hands meeting in Meridian's main conference center was packed with employees from every department. Many looked nervous. Corporate fraud scandals often led to layoffs and restructuring even for innocent employees. As I took the podium, I could feel hundreds of anxious eyes upon me. Good afternoon, I began. For many of you, this is the first time we're formally meeting. While I've been working alongside you for years, my role as Chief Investment Officer has traditionally been kept private for strategic reasons. That changes today. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. First, let me assure you that Meridian Financial remains strong. The fraud committed by Daniel Reynolds and Sophia Martinez, while serious, affected a limited number of accounts, all of which are being made whole. No jobs are at risk as a result of this situation. A palpable wave of relief swept through the room. Moving forward, I will be taking a more visible leadership role as CEO. Harold Winters will serve as chairman of the board. We believe this transition will strengthen our position in the market and signal our commitment to transparency. I addressed the questions that followed with direct honesty, neither downplaying the severity of the fraud, nor allowing it to overshadow Meridian's fundamental strength as a company. When asked about my personal connection to the case, I acknowledged it straightforwardly. Yes, Daniel Reynolds is my soon-to-be ex-husband, and Sophia Martinez was once a close friend. Their personal betrayal was painful, as betrayal always is. But this case is about professional misconduct, not personal relationships. I would have taken the same actions regardless of who had committed these violations. As the meeting concluded, many employees approached to introduce themselves personally. Some had worked at Meridian for years without ever knowing my true position. Their reactions ranged from surprise to admiration, particularly from the younger, female employees who suddenly saw a powerful role model they hadn't known existed. "I've been here 5 years," one junior analyst told me, "and I always thought Harold ran everything. It's incredible to learn you've been the one making the major, strategic decisions all along." "Sometimes the most effective leadership happens outside the spotlight," I replied. But even as I said it, I wondered if that was truly wisdom, or if I'd been hiding unnecessarily, diminishing my own power out of some misguided belief that it was safer to remain unseen. Late that afternoon, I received another update from Naomi. Daniel's lawyer held an impromptu press conference. He's claiming that Daniel was set up by executives at Meridian who were jealous of his success. I watched the clip on my tablet, observing as Daniel's high-priced attorney painted him as a victim of corporate politics. "My client was targeted because of his rapid rise within the company," the lawyer claimed. "Certain executives saw him as a threat and manipulated evidence to discredit him." The timing of these allegations, coinciding with his personal relationship with Ms. Martinez, raises serious questions about motivation. Harold, who had joined me to view the press conference, shook his head in disgust. "Unbelievable. The man steals millions and still thinks he's the victim." "It's classic Daniel," I replied, unsurprised. "He's never taken responsibility for his actions. Everything is always someone else's fault." "Should we respond?" Harold asked. I considered, then shook my head. "Not directly. Have our PR team release the timeline of the investigation with supporting documentation. The facts speak for themselves." As evening approached, I found myself alone in my office, the events of the past 2 days finally catching up with me. The adrenaline that had carried me through was beginning to fade, leaving space for more complicated emotions to surface. I walked to the window, gazing out at the city as lights began to flicker on in the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there, Daniel and Sophia were in separate holding cells, their glamorous life together shattered. The condo they'd so proudly shown off at their dinner party was now tagged as evidence in a fraud investigation. Their careers were destroyed, their reputations in ruins. My revenge was complete. So why did I feel this strange emptiness? A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. It was Jessica, my executive assistant of 5 years, looking slightly nervous about disturbing me. "I'm sorry to bother you, Ms. Reynolds, but there's a call you might want to take. It's Sophia's sister, Mia." I hadn't spoken to Mia since before the scandal broke. Like Sophia, she'd been a friend. Not as close, but still part of our social circle. "Put her through," I decided, curious about what she could possibly want. "Rebecca," Mia's voice was strained when she came on the line. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from right now. What can I do for you, Mia?" I kept my tone neutral. "It's about my father. The doctors say the stress is making his condition worse. He keeps asking about Sophia, blaming himself." She paused. "I know what my sister did is inexcusable, but our father, he's innocent in all this." "I'm aware of that," I replied. "That's why I've instructed our legal team to focus charges specifically on Sophia, not on Martinez accounting as a firm." "I know, and we're grateful. But there's something else." Another pause. Sophia wants to see him, but the authorities won't allow a hospital visit while she's in custody unless someone posts her bail. Our family has the money, but my mother refuses. She says Sophia needs to face consequences. I was silent, understanding what Mia was asking without her having to say it directly. I wouldn't ask, she continued. But the doctors are concerned about his heart. If something happened and he never got to see her, you want me to post her bail, I stated flatly. Not for her sake, Mia clarified quickly. For our father's. Please, Rebecca. You know what he means to our family. I did know. Anthony Martinez had built his accounting firm from nothing, had put both his daughters through college, had been a pillar of integrity in an industry often lacking it. The irony of his daughter betraying those same values wouldn't be lost on him. I'll consider it, I said finally. Not for Sophia, but for your father. I'll have an answer for you tomorrow. After ending the call, I sat in silence, turning over this unexpected request. Helping Sophia in any way felt like betrayal of my own interests. And yet, punishing Anthony for his daughter's sins felt equally wrong. Harold found me still contemplating this dilemma when he stopped by with the end-of-day reports. You look troubled, he observed. I explained Mia's request. Harold listened thoughtfully before responding. Whatever you decide, he said, make sure it's for the right reasons. Revenge can be satisfying, but compassion is never a weakness. After he left, I called Naomi with instructions to research the conditions that would be attached to Sophia's bail, ensuring she couldn't flee jurisdiction or contact Daniel, and to prepare the necessary funds, though I hadn't yet committed, to providing them. My final call of the evening was from an unexpected source, the prosecutor handling Daniel and Sophia's case. Ms. Reynolds, she began formally, I wanted to update you personally on a development. Daniel Reynolds has offered to testify against Sophia Martinez in exchange for a reduced sentence. He claims she was the mastermind behind the fraud scheme, and that he was merely following her instructions. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. That's ridiculous. Daniel was embezzling funds before Sophia was even involved. We have documentation proving it. We're aware, the prosecutor assured me. We have no intention of accepting his offer. His attempt to shift blame onto Ms. Martinez actually undermines his credibility further. After ending the call, I sat back. Not surprised, but still disgusted by Daniel's willingness to sacrifice Sophia to save himself. Their great love, the one that had supposedly justified destroying our marriage, apparently hadn't been strong enough to withstand the first real test. As I gathered my things to leave for the night, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Exclusive. Daniel Reynolds claims wife set him up in revenge plot. Daniel's lawyer had given an interview to a tabloid financial blog, doubling down on the victim narrative. According to the sensationalized account, I had orchestrated the entire fraud investigation as revenge for Daniel's affair with Sophia, using my secret position of power at Meridian to frame them both. I should have been angry, but instead I felt an odd sense of relief. Daniel's increasingly desperate attempts to escape responsibility were only making him look more guilty. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his wild accusations would gain no traction with prosecutors or the public. As my car pulled away from the Meridian building, I made my decision about Sophia's bail. I would provide the funds, not for her sake but for her father's. Anthony Martinez deserved the chance to reconcile with his daughter, regardless of what she had done, and Sophia deserved the opportunity to face her father and take responsibility for how her actions had affected him. This wasn't forgiveness. I would never forgive Sophia's betrayal. But it was a recognition that revenge, however justified, wasn't the only consideration. Sometimes, extending compassion to the innocent caught in the crossfire was more important than ensuring maximum suffering for the guilty. The thought brought unexpected peace. In choosing to help Anthony Martinez, I was proving something important. Unlike Daniel, I could rise above pure self-interest. I could make decisions based on what was right, not just what served my desire for retribution, and perhaps that, more than anything else I'd done in the past 2 days, was the truest demonstration of power. 3 weeks after Daniel and Sophia's arrests, the media frenzy had finally begun to subside. Meridian Financial's stock had not only recovered, but reached new heights as the market responded positively to my more visible leadership and our transparent handling of the crisis. The initial shock among employees had given way to a renewed sense of purpose and pride in the company's ethical stance. I had settled into my new public role as CEO with surprising ease. Years of directing strategy from the shadows had prepared me well for making decisions in the spotlight. The only real adjustment was the constant visibility, the awareness that employees, clients, and competitors were watching my every move with newfound interest. My decision to post Sophia's bail with strict conditions including an ankle monitor and surrender of her passport had raised eyebrows among some board members. But I'd been firm in my reasoning. Anthony Martinez's health was the only consideration, not any softening toward Sophia herself. On this particular morning, I was reviewing quarterly projections when Naomi entered with an update I'd been expecting. "The divorce is final," she said, placing the documents on my desk. "All terms approved as submitted. Daniel didn't contest anything." I nodded, feeling a curious lack of emotion as I signed the papers that officially ended my 15-year marriage. Perhaps I'd already done my grieving months ago, when I'd first discovered the affair. Or perhaps the public spectacle of Daniel's arrest and the subsequent revelations about his character had so thoroughly erased any lingering affection that this final legal step seemed merely procedural. "Also," Naomi continued, "Catherine Reynolds has requested a meeting." This was unexpected. I hadn't spoken to my former mother-in-law since our tense phone conversation immediately after the press conference. "Did she say what it's about?" "No, just that it's personal, not related to Daniel's case." I considered declining, but ultimately relented. Despite everything, Catherine had been a significant part of my life for many years. "Schedule her for tomorrow afternoon." After Naomi left, I turned back to the divorce decree, my eyes catching on the final line. "The marriage of Daniel James Reynolds and Rebecca Ann Chen Reynolds is hereby dissolved." Rebecca Chen. I hadn't used my maiden name professionally since marriage, but now, with the divorce final, I found myself contemplating a complete return to my original identity. A fresh start, unmarked by association with Daniel's disgrace. My contemplation was interrupted by a call from the prosecutor handling Daniel and Sophia's case. "Ms. Reynolds, I wanted to inform you that we've received a new plea offer from Daniel's attorney," she began. "He's willing to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a 10-year sentence instead of the potential 30 he's facing." "And your response?" I asked, curious about the prosecution's stance. "We're inclined to counter with 15 years. No possibility of parole before serving at least 12. Given the evidence and the amount stolen, it's still a generous offer." I considered this. A decade or more in prison would effectively end Daniel's career and any hope of the glamorous life he'd envisioned with Sophia. Justice would be served, regardless of whether he received 10 years or 30. "That seems reasonable," I agreed. "Has Sophia's counsel made any similar overtures?" "Yes, but with a different approach. She's offering full cooperation, including testimony against Daniel, in exchange for a 5-year sentence. She's also agreed to make financial restitution from her family trust." The contrast was telling. While Daniel continued trying to minimize his responsibility, Sophia appeared to be accepting hers. Whether this reflected genuine remorse or simply a more realistic assessment of her situation was impossible to know. "And will you accept her offer?" I asked. "We're considering it. Her cooperation would certainly strengthen our case against Daniel, though we have enough evidence to convict him without her testimony. If you have any objections, however—" "This is a legal matter, not a personal one," I replied firmly. Whatever arrangement serves justice is the right approach. My personal history with either defendant shouldn't be a factor. After ending the call, I turned back to the window, watching clouds drift across the early summer sky. Despite my words to the prosecutor, I couldn't help but feel a certain satisfaction knowing that both Daniel and Sophia would serve significant prison time. Their mutual betrayal had cost them everything: careers, reputations, freedom, and apparently, even their relationship with each other, if Daniel's willingness to shift blame to Sophia was any indication. The revenge I'd orchestrated had succeeded beyond my expectations. Yet, strangely, the satisfaction was less intense than I'd anticipated. Instead of the vindication I'd imagined, I felt a growing desire to look forward rather than back, to focus on building Meridian's future rather than dwelling on Daniel and Sophia's destruction. My afternoon was consumed with client meetings and strategic planning sessions. The fraud scandal, while damaging in the short term, had created unexpected opportunities as competitors' clients sought more ethical management for their investments. Meridian's reputation for integrity, reinforced by our handling of the internal fraud, had become our greatest asset. The following day, Catherine Reynolds arrived precisely on time for our scheduled meeting. She looked older than when I'd last seen her, the strain of Daniel's arrest evident in the new lines around her eyes and mouth. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, as she took a seat in my office, her voice formal but not hostile. "Of course," I replied, equally measured. "What can I do for you, Catherine?" She took a moment to gather her thoughts, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "First, I want to apologize for my words during our last conversation. I was angry and looking for someone to blame besides my son." This unexpected apology caught me off guard. "I understand. It's natural to want to protect your child." "It was wrong," she insisted. "Daniel made his own choices. Terrible choices." She looked down at her hands before continuing. "He's accepted the plea deal. 15 years, with no parole for at least 12. I nodded, having already received this update from the prosecutor. "I heard. Before he goes to prison next month, he's asked to see you." The request landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of surprise through me. "See me? Why?" Catherine shook her head. "He wouldn't say exactly. Just that there are things he needs to tell you in person." My immediate instinct was to refuse. What could Daniel possibly say that would matter now? What explanation or justification could possibly be worth hearing? "I don't think that would be productive," I said carefully. "Probably not," Catherine agreed, surprising me again. "But I promised him I would ask." She hesitated before adding, "For what it's worth, he's different now. Humbled, I think, is the word. The arrogance is gone." I considered this. The Daniel I knew had never been humbled by anything. His response to setbacks had always been denial, deflection, or blaming others. Exactly, as he'd done initially with the fraud charges. "I'll think about it," I said finally, not committing but not outright refusing either. Catherine nodded, accepting this partial concession. "There's one other thing, a more practical matter." She reached into her purse and withdrew a small velvet. "Daniel asked me to return this to you. He said you'd understand its significance." She placed the box on my desk. From its size and shape, I knew immediately what it contained. My grandmother's sapphire earrings, family heirlooms that had disappeared during our divorce proceedings, which Daniel had claimed to know nothing about. Clearly, he'd taken them, perhaps intending to give them to Sophia as he had my emerald bracelet. "Thank you," I said, not opening the box but slipping it into my desk drawer. Another small piece of myself reclaimed from the wreckage of our marriage. Catherine rose to leave but paused at the door. "Rebecca, for whatever it's worth, I want you to know that I've always respected you. Even now, after everything. Perhaps especially now." After she left, I sat quietly, turning over her words and Daniel's unexpected request. Why would he want to see me? To apologize? To explain? To make one last attempt at manipulation? None of these possibilities seemed worth reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal, and yet some small part of me was curious. Not about reconciliation, that bridge was thoroughly burned, but about understanding. About hearing whatever. Truths Daniel might finally be willing to acknowledge now that all his defenses had failed. My contemplation was interrupted by a call from Mia Martinez. "I just wanted to thank you," she said when I answered, "for what you did for our father. The doctors say his condition has improved significantly since Sophia's visit." "I'm glad to hear that," I replied sincerely. "How is he handling everything else?" "As well as can be expected. The firm's acquisition is moving forward. Dad will stay on as a consultant for the transition, then retire." She paused. "And Sophia has accepted a plea deal, 5 years plus restitution." "I heard. She asked me to tell you something if you were willing to listen." I hesitated, then relented. "Go ahead." She said to tell you that she knows no apology could ever be sufficient, but that she is truly sorry, not just for the fraud, but for betraying your friendship. She said it was the biggest mistake of her life, and one she'll regret forever. The words stirred complicated emotions. Part of me wanted to dismiss them as convenient regrets from someone facing prison time. But another part recognized the ring of truth. Sophia had lost everything: her career, her freedom, her relationship with Daniel, her father's trust. From such a place of total loss, perhaps genuine reflection was possible. "Thank you for passing that along," I said noncommittally. "There's more," Mia continued. "She wanted you to know that Daniel had been pressuring her to help with the fraud scheme for months before she gave in. She's not excusing what she did, but she thought you should know that it was his idea from the beginning." This aligned with what our investigation had uncovered, that Daniel's embezzlement had started before Sophia became involved. It wasn't new information, but hearing it confirmed from Sophia herself provided a certain validation. After ending the call, I found myself at another crossroads. Both Daniel and Sophia had, in their separate ways, extended overtures that seemed to acknowledge their wrongdoing. Neither deserved my forgiveness, yet both seemed to be seeking some form of closure before beginning their prison sentences. The question was whether such closure would benefit me as well. Would hearing Daniel's explanations or Sophia's regrets help me move forward, or would it simply reopen wounds better left to heal on their own? I was still contemplating these questions when Harold stopped by my office late that afternoon. "Meridian's been invited to bid on the Westfield account," he announced, referring to a major client we'd been pursuing for years without success. "Apparently, they were impressed by how we handled the recent situation. Integrity in crisis seems to have become our best selling point." I smiled at the irony. "So Daniel's fraud might actually help us land the biggest client in the industry?" Poetic. "Justice," Harold agreed. "Speaking of which, I heard Catherine Reynolds came to see you today." News traveled fast in corporate headquarters. "She did. Daniel apparently wants to meet with me before he begins his sentence." Harold raised an eyebrow. "And will you?" "I haven't decided." I shared the conflicting considerations, including Sophia's message via her sister. Harold listened thoughtfully before responding. "You know, when my wife left me for my business partner 20 years ago, I was consumed with bitterness, refused all contact, even when she tried to apologize years later." He looked out the window, his expression reflective. "After she died, I realized that my refusal had hurt me more than it had hurt her. Holding on to that anger had become a burden I carried alone." I considered his words. "Are you suggesting I should meet with Daniel? Forgive him?" "Not necessarily forgiven, but perhaps hear what he has to say. Not for his benefit, but for yours." Closure takes many forms, Rebecca. Sometimes it comes from confronting the past one final time before letting it go completely. After Harold left, I found myself returning to the small velvet box Catherine had delivered. I opened it to find my grandmother's sapphire earrings nestled inside, exactly as I remembered them. Family treasures that had been passed down through generations of Chen women, only to be stolen by the man who had promised to honor our family as his own. Their return felt symbolic. Another piece of myself reclaimed, another step toward becoming fully Rebecca Chen again, rather than Rebecca Reynolds, the betrayed wife. That evening, as I prepared to leave the office, I made my decision. I would meet with Daniel once before he went to prison, not to forgive or reconcile, but to hear whatever truths he was finally ready to admit. I would listen to Sophia's full explanation through her sister, for the same reason. Not because either deserved my attention, but because understanding the complete story might help me close this chapter definitively and move forward, unburdened. I called Catherine and arranged for a brief meeting with Daniel the following week, under controlled circumstances at his lawyer's office. Then I called Mia and asked her to share any additional context Sophia wished to provide about their betrayal and the fraud. As I drove home that night, I felt a strange sense of lightness. The revenge I had so carefully orchestrated had succeeded, beyond my expectations. Daniel and Sophia had lost everything. Their freedom, their careers, their reputations, and apparently even their relationship with each other. Justice had been served both legally and karmically, but perhaps the most satisfying aspect wasn't their downfall, but my rise. In exposing their fraud, I had also liberated myself from the shadows I'd hidden in for years. I had reclaimed not just my stolen possessions and my company's stolen funds, but my own power and visibility. That, more than anything else, felt like the true victory, one that would continue to yield benefits long after Daniel and Sophia had faded into footnotes in Meridian Financial's history. The law offices of Brennan and Associates occupied the 38th floor of a gleaming downtown tower, its reception area designed to project wealth and confidence. As I was led through polished marble hallways to a private conference room, I reminded myself why I had agreed to this meeting. Closure, not reconciliation. Understanding, not forgiveness. Security had been one of my conditions. 2 guards stood discreetly by the door, and Naomi waited in an adjacent room, monitoring through a one-way glass panel. Daniel might be headed to prison in a week, but I wasn't taking any chances with a man who had already proven himself capable of elaborate deception. When Daniel was brought in, I barely recognized him. Gone was the confident executive with the perfect suit and practiced smile. In his place sat a diminished figure in wrinkled business casual attire, his face gaunt, eyes ringed with shadows. 3 weeks in detention while finalizing his plea deal had stripped away his polished exterior, revealing the hollow core beneath. His eyes widened slightly when he saw me, perhaps surprised that I'd actually come, or perhaps reacting to my appearance. I had deliberately chosen to wear not the modest, unassuming clothes he was accustomed to seeing me in, but a tailored designer suit that reflected my true position and power. My grandmother's sapphire earrings completed the ensemble, a small but pointed reminder of what he had taken and been forced to return. "Rebecca," he began, his voice hoarse, "thank you for coming." I didn't respond immediately, simply studying him across the conference table. This man had been my husband for 15 years. I had loved him once, had built a life with him, had trusted him completely. Now he was a stranger, and not just because of his altered appearance. "Your mother said you had something to tell me," I said finally, my voice cool and professional. "I'm listening." Daniel seemed to shrink further under my direct gaze. "I hardly know where to begin." "The truth would be novel," I suggested. "You could try that." He flinched but didn't argue with the implied accusation. I deserve that. He took a deep breath. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, not just for the affair with Sophia, but for everything. The lies, the theft, the way I treated you toward the end. I regarded him silently, waiting for more. A simple apology wasn't nearly enough to warrant this meeting. When I first started taking money from the client accounts, it was just a small amount, he continued. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd pay it back before anyone noticed, but then it became easier each time and the amounts got larger. Why? I asked. Your salary at Meridian was more than generous. We lived comfortably. Daniel's gaze dropped to the table. It wasn't about need. It was about wanting more. Status. Recognition. He looked up again. You were always so content with what we had. The modest house, the practical cars. But I wanted to be someone important. And you thought money would make you important. It wasn't a question. I thought it would make me visible, he corrected. All those years, watching Harold run the company, aspiring to reach his level someday, never knowing that the real power was elsewhere. A bitter smile flickered across his face. With my own wife, who never thought to share that with me. So, this was part of it, resentment that I had kept my true position at Meridian secret from him. My career was my own, I said evenly. Just as yours was yours. We agreed on that from the beginning. But this wasn't just a career choice, Rebecca. This was a fundamental lie about who you were. As opposed to your fundamental honesty? I countered, feeling a flash of anger. You stole millions from clients. You cheated on me with my best friend. You took family heirlooms that weren't yours to take. And you're questioning my integrity? Daniel had the grace to look ashamed. You're right. I have no moral high ground here. None at all. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we both kept parts of ourselves hidden. The difference is that your secrets were legal and mine weren't. I considered this unexpected perspective. There was a grain of truth in it. I had deliberately maintained a separation between my professional power and my personal life. Not just with Daniel, but with everyone. I had chosen to remain in the shadows, to let others be the public face of my success. Why, Sophia? I asked, changing direction to the question that had haunted me most. Of all people, why my closest friend? Daniel looked pained. It wasn't planned, at least not at first. She was helping with some accounting questions for a client presentation, and we started working late together. One night there was too much wine, and he trailed off. After that, it was like an addiction. The excitement. The risk. And you needed her to help cover your financial tracks, I added, seeing the complete picture now. The affair wasn't just about sex or emotion. It was tactical. He flinched again. Not entirely. I do care for Sophia. But yes, once she knew about the initial financial manipulations, it made sense to bring her in deeper. She had the skills to help hide what I was doing. Until she didn't, I noted. Your schemes grew too ambitious, too obvious. They did, he admitted. After a while, it was like I couldn't help myself. Each success made me bolder. I started believing I was untouchable. I leaned back in my chair, studying the man I had once shared everything with. And now? Now that you're facing 15 years in prison? Do you still believe it was worth it? Daniel's hollow laugh held no humor. Worth it? I've lost everything. My career, my freedom, my reputation. He met my eyes directly. No, Rebecca. None of it was worth it. Then why did you try to blame me after you were caught? Your lawyer claimed I orchestrated a setup because of the affair. He had the decency to look embarrassed. Desperation, denial. I couldn't face what I'd done, so I looked for someone else to blame. He shook his head. I've had a lot of time to think in detention about the kind of man I've become. It's not someone I'm proud of. This admission of self-awareness was so unlike the Daniel I knew that I found myself momentarily taken aback. Prison was still ahead of him, but it seemed the process of reckoning had already begun. What about Sophia? I asked. Your lawyer tried to shift all the blame to her when you were first arrested. Another decision I'm not proud of, Daniel admitted. When everything was falling apart, I was willing to sacrifice anyone to save myself. He paused. Sophia and we haven't spoken since our arrests. Her family made it clear I'm to have no contact with her, now or after prison. And her plea deal? Her testimony against you? I don't blame her, he said quietly. She was following my lead from the beginning. The fraud was my idea, my initiative. Her cooperation with prosecutors is just her finally making the right choice, even if it's too late. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of missed opportunities and irreversible choices hanging in the air between us. I have a question, Daniel said finally. If I hadn't started the embezzlement, if you hadn't caught us, would you have ever told me about your real position at Meridian? I considered this counterfactual carefully. Probably not, I admitted. I'd spent so many years cultivating that separation between my personal and professional lives that it had become second nature. Why? He pressed. Were you afraid I couldn't handle your success? That it would threaten me somehow? Initially, perhaps, I acknowledged. But over time, it became more about protecting Meridian than protecting your ego. The fewer people who knew I controlled the company, the less risk of that information affecting our strategic position. But I was your husband, Daniel said, a hint of the old self-righteous tone creeping back into his voice. Yes. A husband who, as it turns out, was capable of significant ethical breaches when tempted, I pointed out. Imagine if you had known about my controlling interest while you were embezzling funds. Would you have stopped at client accounts? Or would you have looked for ways to access corporate reserves as well? He had no answer for that, his momentary indignation deflating as quickly as it had arisen. I didn't come here to debate hypotheticals, I said, checking my watch. Our time is almost up. Is there anything else you wanted to say? Daniel hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small envelope. I know it's inadequate, but I wanted to return this as well. He slid it across the table to me. Inside was my mother's jade pendant, another family heirloom I'd thought, lost during our divorce. The sight of it brought an unexpected surge of emotion. My mother had given it to me before she died, and I'd been devastated when it disappeared. Thank you, I said quietly, slipping it into my purse. There's one more thing, Daniel said, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. Something I need to confess, now that everything else has come to light. I tensed, bracing myself for yet another revelation. Your mother's illness, the timing of my affair with Sophia. What about it? I asked, a chill running through me. It wasn't coincidental, he admitted, unable to see my eyes. Sophia and I had been flirting for months before that. But we deliberately escalated things when you were most distracted by your mother's deterioration. We counted on your grief and exhaustion to keep you from noticing changes in our behavior. The calculated cruelty of this confession struck me with physical force. I had spent the final 3 months of my mother's life traveling back and forth to her hospice facility, emotionally drained and physically exhausted. All while my husband and best friend were not only betraying me, but strategically using my pain as cover for their betrayal. Get out, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Rebecca, we're done here. I stood, gathering my things with hands that weren't quite steady. Guard, please remove Mr. Reynolds. As security led him toward the door, Daniel looked back over his shoulder. I am sorry, Rebecca, for everything. More than you can ever know. I said nothing, waiting until the door closed behind him before allowing myself to sink back into my chair, the jade pendant clutched tightly in my palm. Naomi entered from the adjacent room, her expression concerned. "Are you all right?" "I will be," I assured her, regaining my composure. "Let's go. I have a company to run." The drive back to Meridian was silent, my thoughts churning with this final piece of Daniel's betrayal. Using my mother's dying months as cover for their affair seemed a cruelty beyond even what I had imagined them capable of. It added a new dimension to their dishonesty, not just opportunistic, but calculated, targeted. By the time I reached my office, however, something unexpected had happened. Instead of feeling freshly wounded by this revelation, I felt a strange sense of liberation. This final confirmation of Daniel's character, and Sophia's, removed any lingering doubt or nostalgia I might have harbored. There was nothing left to mourn, no redeeming aspect I had overlooked. The break was complete and irrevocable. Harold was waiting in my office, ostensibly to discuss the Westfield account, but clearly curious about my meeting with Daniel. "How did it go?" he asked as I set down my things. "Illuminating," I replied. "And final." He studied my expression. "You seem lighter." "I am," I realized, somewhat surprised. I thought seeing Daniel again would be difficult. Instead, it was clarifying. Closure? Something like that. I touched the jade pendant now hanging around my neck, restored to its rightful place. He returned another piece of jewelry he'd taken, and confessed to some additional calculations in his betrayal. Surprisingly, learning how thoroughly corrupt he was feels like a gift. There's no room left for doubt or second-guessing. Harold nodded thoughtfully. The last ghost exorcised. Exactly. I turned to my computer, ready to refocus on Meridian's future. Now, about the Westfield proposal. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Mia Martinez. "I wanted to let you know that my father has been released from the hospital. He's doing much better." "I'm glad to hear it," I replied sincerely. "He asked to speak with you if you're willing. Not about Sophia specifically, but about the future of our firm's relationship." I considered this. Martinez Accounting was being acquired by a larger firm, but many of their client relationships would continue under new management. There was no reason Meridian couldn't maintain a professional connection, especially with Anthony himself serving in an advisory capacity during the transition. "I'd be happy to meet with him," I agreed. "Professional relationships shouldn't be defined by personal complications." "Thank you," Mia said, sounding relieved. "And Sophia wanted me to pass along one last message before she begins her sentence." "Next week." I hesitated but ultimately relented. "Go ahead." "She said to tell you that she finally understands what it means to lose everything that matters. She said it's no consolation, but she believes your success is the universe bringing balance after what she and Daniel did to you." The message was unexpected. Not an apology this time, but an acknowledgement of karmic justice. Coming from Sophia, who had always scoffed at such spiritual concepts, it represented a significant shift in perspective. "Tell her I received the message," I said neutrally, "and that I wish her the capacity for genuine reflection during her time away." It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't sure such a thing was possible given the magnitude of their betrayal. But it was, perhaps, a recognition that Sophia was at least attempting to reckon with her actions in a way Daniel had only begun to approach. That evening, I found myself drawn to my mother's photo album, now displayed openly in my living room, then tucked away where Daniel had always preferred it. "Too old-fashioned," he'd complained. I turned to a family gathering from years ago, before my marriage, before Daniel, before any of the complications that had followed. There was my mother, vibrant and smiling, the jade pendant gleaming at her throat. Beside her, My father looked proudly at me, his only daughter, the heir to his business acumen and determination. They had raised me to be independent, capable, and resilient, qualities that had served me well through this ordeal. You would have been proud, I told them, their smiling images. Not of revenge, perhaps, but of how I've emerged from it. My phone chimed with a text from Harold. Westfield confirmed for Monday presentation. Team is ready. This could be transformative for Meridian. I smiled, setting aside the album and returning to my laptop to review the presentation materials. The past was important to acknowledge, but it was the future that deserved my focus now. Meridian's future. My future. Both finally aligned and unobscured by deception or compromise. The revenge against Daniel and Sophia had been thorough and devastating, more complete than I could have imagined when I first discovered their betrayal. But the true victory wasn't in their downfall. It was in my emergence as my full, undiminished self. Rebecca Chen, no longer hiding her power or apologizing for her success. Daniel was headed to prison. Sophia would follow. Their grand romance, built on betrayal and fraud, had crumbled under pressure. But I was still standing, stronger, more visible, and more authentic than ever before. That was a revenge sweeter than any punishment could provide. Not just surviving their betrayal, but thriving because of it. 1 year after Daniel and Sophia began serving their respective prison sentences, Meridian Financial hosted its annual charity gala at the Grand Meridian Hotel. As CEO, I stood at the entrance, greeting guests in a custom midnight blue gown, my grandmother's sapphire earrings, and my mother's jade pendant completing the ensemble. The event had been rebranded under my leadership, no longer the stuffy, networking-focused gathering Daniel had always championed, but a genuine fundraiser for educational scholarships for underprivileged students. Rebecca Chen, you've outdone yourself, Harold commented, approaching with champagne flutes. The event is already trending on social media. Donations are running at twice last year's rate. I smiled, accepting the glass. Success is the best response to setbacks, always has been. The past year had transformed Meridian Financial. With me fully at the helm, we'd secured the Westfield account and a dozen other major clients who appreciated our ethical approach to finance. Our stock had reached record highs, and industry publications that had once breathlessly covered the scandal now routinely featured profiles of my leadership style and strategic vision. Have you seen the latest Financial Times? Harold asked. They've named you one of the 50 most influential women in global finance. I saw, I acknowledged. Quite a change from last year's headlines. Speaking of changes, Harold nodded toward the entrance, where Anthony Martinez had just arrived, looking remarkably recovered from his health crisis of the previous year. Your 3 o'clock meeting is here. Anthony made his way through the crowd to greet me, his handshake warm and firm. Rebecca, the event looks wonderful. Thank you for the invitation. I'm glad you could make it, I replied sincerely. How are you feeling? Much better. The doctors say my heart is stronger than it's been in years. He glanced around the elegant ballroom. And how are you? Truly? Thriving, I answered honestly, both personally and professionally. Anthony nodded, understanding more than most what the past year had entailed. After his recovery, we'd met several times to discuss the professional relationship between Meridian and the restructured Martinez accounting. Those meetings had gradually evolved into a mentorship of sorts, with Anthony offering the paternal wisdom and support that had been missing since my own father's passing. I received a letter from Sophia last week, he said, his expression growing somber. She's completing a business ethics course in prison. Ironic, I suppose, but she seems genuinely committed to it. I nodded, unsurprised. Our paths had diverged, irrevocably, but through occasional updates from Mia, I'd heard that Sophia was using her time in prison constructively, earning a paralegal certification, mentoring other inmates, acknowledging her mistakes rather than denying them as Daniel continued to do. "And you?" Anthony asked gently. "Have you found peace with everything that happened?" I considered the question seriously. Peace isn't quite the right word. Closure, perhaps. Perspective, definitely. I looked around at the thriving company event, at the leadership team I'd built, at the success we'd achieved despite, or perhaps because of, the challenges we'd faced. I've moved forward. That's what matters. As Anthony moved on to greet other guests, Naomi appeared at my elbow with a discreet update. "Final numbers from the Martinez acquisition are in. The integration has been completed successfully. No remaining connection to Sophia or her previous activities." "Good," I nodded. The professional separation was complete, allowing both firms to move forward without the shadow of past fraud hanging over them. The gala continued with speeches, musical performances, and the scholarship announcements that were the evening's centerpiece. When it was my turn to address the crowd, I felt none of the anxiety that had once accompanied public speaking. This was my company, my vision, my success to celebrate. "Welcome, everyone, to Meridian Financial's annual scholarship gala," I began, surveying the room filled with colleagues, clients, and community leaders. "This past year has taught us all important lessons about integrity, transparency, and the responsibility that comes with financial stewardship." The subtle reference to the previous year's scandal wasn't lost on the audience, but neither did it dominate the conversation. We had acknowledged the past, learned from it, and moved decisively beyond it. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Meridian will be funding 50 full scholarships for students pursuing careers in ethical business practices. We believe that investing in the next generation of financial leaders is the best way to ensure a future defined by integrity rather than expediency. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause, particularly from the young scholarship recipients seated at places of honor near the front of the room. These students, bright, ambitious, and now financially supported through their education, represented the positive legacy I was determined to build in the wake of Daniel and Sophia's betrayal. As the evening wound down, I found myself on the hotel's terrace, taking a moment alone beneath the stars. The city lights sparkled below, mirroring the constellation above. It was a perfect spring night, cool and clear, filled with possibility. "Mind if I join you?" Voice asked from the doorway. It was Jordan Harris, the CEO of Westfield Investments, and now one of Meridian's most significant clients. "Please," I gestured to the space beside me at the balcony rail. "Remarkable event," he commented, looking out over the city. "Even more remarkable turnaround for Meridian. When the scandal broke last year, many predicted your company wouldn't survive it." Those predictions underestimated both Meridian's fundamental strength and the value of transparency in crisis, I replied. Jordan studied me with undisguised admiration. "They also underestimated you, I think." I smiled, neither confirming nor denying this assessment. "How are the portfolio adjustments working out for Westfield? The quarterly reports showed promising initial returns." "Exceptional," he confirmed. "Your team's approach has already increased our yield by nearly 4%. The board is extremely pleased." "I'm glad to hear it." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Jordan spoke again. "I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I've been meaning to ask, would you consider having dinner sometime? Outside of a business context?" The invitation wasn't entirely unexpected. Jordan was intelligent, ethical, and accomplished. Exactly the kind of person I might have been interested in under different circumstances. But the past year has taught me the value of independence and self-sufficiency in a way I couldn't have articulated before. "I'm flattered," I replied honestly, "but I'm not dating at the moment. My focus is entirely on Meridian and rebuilding my personal life on my own terms." Rather than appearing disappointed, Jordan nodded with respect. "I understand completely. The offer remains open if your circumstances change." He handed me his personal card. "No pressure, just an option for when you're ready." After he rejoined the party, I remained on the terrace a few minutes longer, reflecting on how different my response had been from what it might have been in the past. The old Rebecca, the one who had defined herself partly through her relationship with Daniel, might have jumped at the chance for validation from someone like Jordan. But I no longer needed that kind of external affirmation. The next morning, I arrived at my office earlier than usual, energized rather than drained by the previous night's event. The early hour gave me time to review the latest development in Daniel's situation before the day's meetings began. His appeal for a sentence reduction had been denied. The judge's ruling was clear and unequivocal. The evidence of fraud was overwhelming, the breach of fiduciary duty egregious, and the 15-year sentence entirely appropriate given the magnitude of his crimes. I felt no particular satisfaction at this news, but neither did I feel any sympathy. Daniel had made his choices, and now he was living with their consequences, just as I was living with mine. The difference was that my choices had led to growth and success, while his had led to disgrace and imprisonment. Naomi entered with the morning briefing, her efficiency as impeccable as always. The gala raised $3.2 million for the scholarship fund, exceeding our target by 20%. Media coverage is overwhelmingly positive, and the Westfield integration is proceeding ahead of schedule. Excellent. What about the London expansion? The regulatory approvals came through this morning. We can begin staffing the new office immediately. I nodded, pleased. Meridian's international growth was a key part of my 5-year strategy, and the London office represented our first major step into European markets. One more thing, Naomi added, her tone shifting slightly. Catherine Reynolds called. Daniel has been transferred to a minimum security facility upstate. She thought you might want to know. I considered this information, trying to identify my own reaction. A year ago, news about Daniel would have triggered complex emotions: anger, pain, perhaps even a certain vindication. Now, it registered as little more than an update about a former business associate, someone whose life had intersected with mine but no longer defined any part of it. Thank you for letting me know, I said simply. No response necessary. The rest of the day unfolded with the structured productivity that had become my hallmark at Meridian. Client meetings, strategy sessions, mentoring conversations with promising junior executives. Each interaction reinforced what I had come to understand over the past year: that professional fulfillment didn't require personal compromise, and that authentic leadership was more effective than the performance Daniel had always put on. Late that afternoon, I took a rare break to visit the small memorial garden I'd established in my mother's honor at a local hospice facility. It was a peaceful space, filled with her favorite flowers and a small meditation area where families could find respite during difficult times. As I placed fresh flowers beside her plaque, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since those painful days when I'd shuttled between her hospice room and my failing marriage. The grief of losing her remained, but it had softened into something bittersweet, rather than purely painful. And the betrayal that had accompanied that loss, Daniel, and Sophia's calculated exploitation of my vulnerability, no longer held any power to wound me. You were right, Mom, I said quietly to the gentle spring breeze. Everything you taught me about self-reliance and inner strength, it all proved true in the end. My phone buzzed with a message from Harold. Board unanimously approved the new compensation structure for junior staff. Your proposal for profit sharing at all levels passed without opposition. I smiled, pleased that this initiative, one Daniel had always dismissed as unnecessarily generous, was now becoming reality. Meridian under my leadership would be defined not just by financial success, but by ethical treatment of employees at every level. The company culture I was building stood in deliberate contrast to the cutthroat hierarchical environment Daniel had promoted. That evening, as I prepared for a rare quiet night at home, I received an unexpected message, an email from Sophia, sent through the prison's monitored communication system. I hesitated before opening it, unsure whether I wanted any direct contact after a year of carefully maintained distance. Curiosity finally won out. "Rebecca," it began simply, "I know you have no reason to read this, much less respond. But as I complete my ethics course, our final assignment is to write to someone we've harmed and take full, unqualified responsibility for our actions. You are at the top of that list." What I did, both the friendship betrayal and the financial fraud, was inexcusable. There were 1,000 moments when I could have made different choices, and I failed at every one of them. I lied to you. I helped Daniel steal from clients, and I participated in using your mother's illness as cover for our affair. These actions reflect a moral failure on my part that I am only now beginning to fully comprehend. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and you don't owe it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what real integrity looks like. I see it in how you've handled everything, in how you've rebuilt Meridian, in how you've moved forward without letting bitterness define you. The news coverage of your success reaches even here. Every article about Meridian's growth under your leadership is a reminder of what real strength looks like. It's not found in deception or taking shortcuts, but in doing the right thing even when it's difficult. I still have 4 years left on my sentence. When I'm released, I'll never work in finance again. My certifications have been permanently revoked, and rightly so. But I'm studying paralegal work with a focus on helping women who have been victims of financial abuse. Maybe someday I'll be able to prevent someone else from experiencing what I helped inflict on you. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that your example of resilience and integrity has had an impact, even on someone who betrayed. Both, Sophia. I sat with the email for a long time, letting its words settle. Unlike Daniel's self-serving apologies during our final meeting, Sophia's message contained no excuses, no implicit requests for absolution, no suggestion that I owed her anything. It was perhaps the first completely honest communication between us in years. Did it change anything? Not fundamentally. The breach of trust had been too profound, the harm too deliberate. But there was something quietly affirming about knowing that my response to their betrayal, choosing growth over bitterness, transparency over deception, had registered even with one of the people who had hurt me most. I didn't reply to the email. Some chapters were better left closed. But I didn't delete it either, saving it instead as a marker of how far I'd come since those dark days of discovery and devastation. Later that evening, as I reviewed the final plans for Meridian's London expansion, my phone rang with a call from Mia Martinez. "Rebecca," she began without preamble, "I know this is unexpected, but I could use your advice. The firm that acquired Martinez Accounting has offered me a leadership position, but I'm concerned about potential conflicts given everything that happened." I considered her request thoughtfully. Mia had been peripheral to the scandal, neither involved in Sophia's actions nor aware of them until the arrests. She had handled the aftermath with dignity, supporting her father while maintaining appropriate distance from her sister's crimes. "The past doesn't have to define your future." "Mia," I replied, "if the position is right for your skills and ambitions, you should consider it on its own merits. You don't think it would create awkwardness with Meridian as a client?" "Meridian deals with people based on their own integrity, not their family connections," I assured her. "If you're the right person for the role, your sister's actions shouldn't prevent you from taking it." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Thank you, Rebecca. That means a lot, especially coming from you." After we hung up, I returned to my work with renewed focus. The interaction had reinforced something I'd come to believe strongly over the past year, that while accountability for wrongdoing was essential, so was the ability to judge each person on their own merits, rather than through the lens of others. Mistakes. Daniel and Sophia had betrayed me in the most personal and professional ways possible. Their actions had caused real harm. To me, to Meridian's clients, to their own families. But their choices didn't define anyone but themselves. Not Meridian as a company, not Mia as a professional, and certainly not me as a person. As midnight approached, I closed my laptop and moved to the window of my penthouse apartment, looking out over the city I'd made my own. In the reflection of the glass, I caught sight of myself, confident, composed, completely at home in my power. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the one who had sat at that dinner party a year ago, watching her husband and best friend flaunt their betrayal while pretending to hide it. That woman had been playing a role assigned to her by others' expectations. This woman, the real Rebecca Chen, was finally, authentically herself. My revenge against Daniel and Sophia had been thorough and devastating. They had lost everything, their freedom, their careers, their reputations, and each other. Justice, both legal and karmic, had been served completely. But the true victory wasn't in what they had lost. It was in what I had found, my voice, my visibility, my uncompromised strength. That was the most satisfying revenge of all, living well, on my own terms, without apology or pretense. As I turned away from the window toward the future that stretched bright before me, I knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.